let's see.
All right. Yes, my topic for the presentation is repatriation then and now in West Africa. Too long a debate. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Please continue.
Yes. So may I continue? Can you hear me?
Yes. Just do that.
Right. Okay. At the time of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade, attempts were made to send ex-slaves back to their land of birth. Consequently, the British humanitarians founded the Sierra Leone colony in 1787. The American Colonization Society followed their example and established a similar settlement in 1822 in modern Liberia.
Nigeria.
Despite initial challenges, the most catastrophic being the death of some of these early settlers, the two colonies survived, and the remainder of them gradually became integrated into the indigenous society. From Brazil came other free slaves who took habitation in modern Nigeria, Ghana, Benin, and Togo. These were about the only mass movements into West Africa of people of slave origin, with the hope that the Sierra Leone and Liberian experiments would be replicated in other parts of the continent. However, this process was never continued. And since then, repatriation has remained a dialogue and a debate. Is repatriation possible? Or will it remain a mere fallacy? What are the implications of current debates on the issue? Does the past offer any workable solutions? This paper traces developments on repatriation since the abolition and attempts to compare current efforts and debates with those of the past as a way of contributing to the discourses on the transatlantic slave trade. Method. It is a simple qualitative approach that I have adopted, and I use mainly secondary sources from the KNUST library and the internet. It should be noted that there had been other forms of slavery apart from the transatlantic slave trade. Some of these include the Arab slave trade, serfdom, which was in Europe. And you realize that especially with serfdom, by the end of the Middle Ages, it has been abolished in most parts of Europe, but it continued to exist in Eastern Europe, particularly Russia. And only in 1861, just about the time that the slave trade was being abolished, that it was also abolished in Russia. Then we had other forms of it. Yes, then please, the slide, yes. Oh, go to the next slide. Oh. We have, yes, so much of the histories of these other forms of slavery remain mainly in the annals of history and come up occasionally for debate in academia and discussion in other areas. But what we have realized is that the transatlantic slave trade, after it has been abolished, has continued to be at the center of discussion and has become an important theme since its abolition. What accounts for this and why this has been so? Now you realize that the slave trade has impacted more on the world, I think, than any other of these other forms of slavery. For example, we have the Negroes in America, what they are experiencing today, the assassination or murder of George Floyd and other issues that are popping up day in and day out. You know, so the slave trade has continued to occupy space, and it's a subject of debate since its abolition, and various debates have taken place as a result of that. Now I'm going to look at the various trajectories. I'm going to look at the various movements that has taken place since it was abolished. And then I'm going to look at up to 1900. You realize that up to 1900, the movements were some kind of mad movements. For example, Sierra Leone in 1787, there were Negroes that came. Later on, they came with along with some whites. Then we had the Nova Scotians who joined them. They came to Sierra Leone from Canada, and these were ex-slaves who were loyalists during the American War of Independence. Together with some whites who were loyalists, they were transported to Canada. But while in Canada, they didn't find life comfortable. They and their white counterparts moved there as a result of the same situation because they were being persecuted for being loyal. They were loyal to Britain during the American War of Independence. So they decided to look elsewhere. So they also came and joined the early settlers in Sierra Leone. Then we had the third by the Maroons from Jamaica. So they also came and joined. And then we had the recaptives. These were those who, on their way to the New World, were brought back, and that was when the abolition had started. And so slaves which were caught during the passage were brought back to the Sierra Leone colony. These constituted those who came to the Sierra Leone colony. It was a kind of mass movement of the people. Then later, we had Liberia following the example of the Sierra Leoneans, and then the American Colonization Society in 1828 also sent a group of ex-slaves to the Liberian colony, and they were called Americo-Liberians. Then we had another form of mass movement, the Afro-Brazilians. Following the revolt by slaves in Mali, Bahia's capital, they were given the opportunity to also migrate because they had become a nuisance. So this group of Afro-Brazilians, they came to the West Coast and settled in countries such as Nigeria, Ghana, Benin, and Togo. Now, when we consider these movements, these two groups of people, the Liberian returnees and then the Sierra Leone returnees to these Brazilians, you will see that the Brazilian cohort, they were welcomed by the indigenous people along the coastline of Nigeria, Ghana, Togo, and Benin. You find that the chiefs welcomed them, gave them land, and they settled, and they were readily absorbed into the indigenous groups. But we realized that the Liberian and then the Sierra Leonean cohorts, they had problems, and you realize that it was because for them, it was through the mediation of the colonizers that they bought land to resettle these people. So right from the outset, there had been some kind of suspicions between the two groups of people. And that's a major difference that should be taken note here. Next slide. Yes, and then the trajectory continues. You realize that from 1900 to the present, there had been a slight, or there has been a major difference in the way the migration took place. And the mass movements ended by the close of the 19th century. But if you consider the period between 1900 and up to the late 1950s, there seems to be a kind of void. In the literature, I haven't found these movements again. I'm yet to find out, it's a work in progress, and I'm yet to find out whether colonialism did not support these movements. But from about the late 1950s to the present, we find another way in which the people move. The mass movements ended where we have individuals coming in on their own. And sometimes some of them were also invited, especially by the Pan-Africanist heads of state. We have an example here in Nkrumah. He invited George Padmore and W.E.B. Du Bois and others to come in and help. He had established the Bureau of African Affairs, and it was mainly concerned with dealing with Pan-African issues. So George Padmore was in charge of that. And then we also have Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Maya Angelou, Richard Wright, and others coming in at short intervals to help, build the new nations. Then in other parts of West Africa, we can find other examples, especially in Nigeria. We had Martin Luther King Jr. be invited by Nnamdi Azikiwe to come during the time that he was being inaugurated as the Governor General of Liberia. And in Tanzania, we also find other parts of Africa, apart from West Africa, Others also went there, especially in Julius Nyerere's Tanzania, who being a Pan-Africanist also invited some to come in and help build the new nation of Tanzania. Now, what we realize is that as they came in, they rekindled the passion of Pan-Africanism, and it helped to generate some kind of patriotism among the people. In Ghana, for instance, the Ghanaian Times editorial comments of the period gave an impression of this kind of feeling that the Africans had, and I quote, "We in Ghana, with open hands and warm hearts, welcome into our homes and institutions people of African descent who have come to our country and there certainly to work, learn, and live among us. Our hospitality is theirs for the plucking." Now, this gesture was continued up to the present time. It has been continued up to the present times. Late President Rawlings did not only invite African Americans to take up permanent residence in Ghana, but also went ahead to accord them automatic citizenship. When he visited the United States in 1998, he gave Isaac Hayes and Diane Warwick a cruise on the Volta Lake when the two paid a 5-day visit to Ghana in April 1992. In 2019, the President of the Republic of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, launched a campaign with the intention of getting African diasporans to return, settle, and invest in the continent. The year 2019 which marked the 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade, was therefore dubbed as the year of return. Since then, small groups of diasporans, especially from the USA, have been visiting the country, with a few staying back for long periods. Kalia, born in Los Angeles, is one of those who have settled for good after having moved to Accra in 2017. In Ghana, she works as a massage therapist and a music artist, but has also collaborated with a colleague to start an outfit called HER Collective, aimed at helping continental Africans of the diaspora to link up and share experiences. She reports of her experience. "I came to Africa and found love. I came to Africa and found another level and a layer of myself. It's like an onion. There are so many layers. I've broken it down to that nice sweetness in the middle, and I'm still evolving. I'm still growing." The year 2000 Immigration Act grants diaspora Africans the right of abode status. This provides them with an indefinite right to live and work in Ghana without visas and other forms of restrictions. An additional 2000 Citizenship Act gives diaspora Africans the opportunity to apply for Ghanaian citizenship. In 1960, Martin Luther King Jr. was in Nigeria to participate in the inauguration of Nnamdi Azikiwe as Nigeria's first Governor General of African descent. Apart from West Africa, further examples such as this can be found in other parts of Africa. It is said of the father of Zambia's former president, Kenneth Kaunda, that he was ready to establish houses for African Americans who were willing to return and stay in Zambia. Julius Nyerere also detailed Tanzania's ambassador to the United States to recruit skilled African Americans to support the country's socio-economic development after independence. Now we are going to consider the impact of these movements, and we are going to start with Sierra Leone, Liberia, and then the Afro-Brazilians. In other words, we are going to look at the impact of the mass movements. Now, fear of losing their ancestral lands to the settlers resulted in tensions and conflicts between the first settlers at Sierra Leone and the indigenes, resulting in the disappearance of the first colony. However, as more settlers poured in, the settlements was revived. The Liberian colony also survived indigenous attacks and became established. As people coming from advanced societies, though with very little or no formal education, they remained the standard bearers of European civilization among the local population. In Freetown, great emphasis was laid on education and Christianity. The many children who went to school progressed to form an elite group, and the best among them were taken for further training in various professions. Typical examples being Samuel Ajayi Crowther and James Africanus Bill Horton. The Furabe College in Sierra Leone matured into a university and remained the only provider of higher education in the whole of West Africa until the late 1940s. In Liberia, the lack of good schools and materials for professional training did not prevent the production of elites. Through self-teaching, men advanced into becoming lawyers, doctors, engineers, and clergymen. Many indigenous youths became their employees, and they constituted a source of reference for self-advancement among the local people. Some visited other West African countries and contributed in various ways to their development. For example, Africanist Bill Houghton, who was a surgeon, soldier, and author, and ITA Willis Johnson, who was a journalist, activist, and politician, both worked for some time in the Gold Coast. The Liberian Edward Wilmot Blyden, who was an educator, writer, diplomat, and politician, also surgeon in Nigeria for some time. All three were Pan-Africanists who contributed immensely through their writings and oratory skills to the independence struggle in West Africa, sometimes getting into trouble with the European colonial authorities. Liberia became a republic in 1847 with its first Negro governor as Joseph Jenkins Roberts, while the rest of West Africa awaited to be formally colonized. The Afro-Brazilians who settled in Nigeria, Benin, Togo, and Ghana, and were mainly artisans and tradespeople, brought their skills to bear on the people. They established plantations of mango, cassava, beans, and other vegetables, and put their skills in carpentry, blacksmithing, goldsmithing, tailoring into use, which benefited the indigenous people. They also came along with Brazilian architecture, some of which still remain as monuments. Some of such buildings in Nigeria have come under threat of being collapsed, such as Olympic House, which is now converted into a bank, and Iloja Bar, which was once designated as a national monument, was pulled down in 2016. Some which have been spared and are still standing include Doherty House and Water House, so called because there was a well there from which water was sold to the public. At Jamestown in Accra is another building called Brazil House, which has been preserved. Other places or items associated with the Afro-Brazilians in West Africa include Brazilian Quarters and Brazilian Social Club in Lagos, and a called Brazil in Benin. Now we are moving on to the post-independence returnees. What did they also bring? Then we realized that a most significant contribution of this category of returnees to Africa is the rekindling of the spirit of Pan-Africanism, which was so much alive in the immediate post-independence era. The likes of George Padmore, W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther King Jr., and Dr. Robert Lee, who came to West Africa in the 1960s, falls under this category. Some have expressed their sense of belonging and nostalgia for Africa as portrayed in the following words by Delisha Attenwood of Long Beach, California. I'm an African American. I have lived in West Africa for 2 years and visited other West African countries. In the US, African Americans are seriously wounded and somewhat lost because we cannot find identity. I feel a connection to those Africans alive today in Africa. After visiting here, I finally see some link, not just with Africa, but with Africans. For their contribution to development in specific localities, some have been installed as development chiefs, which is in Kiswahili in the Akan language in such areas. In 1989, for example, Ben Robinson, an African-American from New York, was installed as a divisional chief at Ituri near Elmina, under the stool name Nana Okofu Ababio Ituri II. In 2001, Nana Korantima Ayeboafa was also made a senior priest of the Akonedi Shrine at Lati in the eastern region of Ghana. These are just a few examples, but we can contact Bob Miller, 2009. He presented an article entitled Chieftaincy, Diaspora, and Development in African Affairs. It has a detailed account of this Nkoswahine phenomenon. Then I realized that all I have detailed is an account of the positive aspects of these migrations, but there's always another side to a coin. So we are going to look at how the interaction through migrations, through these movements, have affected the people in West Africa in a kind of negative way. Yes, so the Liberian Civil War, for instance, which started in 1989 and lasted for about 7 years, was partly attributed to the Americo-Liberians, who were seen to have imposed a kind of hegemony over the indigenous people. Samuel Doe observed this while growing up. When he became the head of state, he turned to his Kan Tra ethnic group for support in imitation of what he had seen about the Americo-Liberian leaders of his country. This aroused ethnic sentiments, leading to his demise in the devastating civil war. For the post-independence returnees, even though in principle they were welcomed with open arms, some complained of ill treatment, and there's evidence of some who were being perceived as suspects of espionage during the Cold War era. Dr. Wendell Jane was deported on suspicion of being a spy, even though he was invited by President Nkrumah to teach at the University of Ghana. And others of his kind also suffered the same fate under President Nyerere of Tanzania. Bill Sutherland from Glen Ridge in New Jersey, husband of famous Ghanaian playwright IFRA Sutherland, who had settled in Ghana, was compelled by such situation to leave Ghana and settle in Tanzania. Foley is an expert from the editorial comment of Ghanaian Times, depicting African suspicions of the African Americans in Africa during the independence period. There appear to be emerging from the Negro American community in Ghana and possibly in other parts of Africa, dangerous Afro-Americans who appear to have mortgaged their consciences for neo-colonialist dollars and favors in the service of collective imperialism. Because of their brown, ebony, or black skins, these notorious Negro agents of imperialism are easily accepted into our homes and social circles as our own brothers and sisters. But they turn out to be reptiles and conscienceless rascals engaged in espionage and playing havoc among sections of our community. Beware, brother, for there is an enemy at your doorstep. The Negro student, a thief or technical aid worker who is equally dangerous as a peaceful-looking white Peace Corps meddler or white CIA agent or embassy stooge. So the people were welcomed with warm hands, but this kind of relationship or this kind of bitterness emerged because they realized within the West African countries or in other parts of Africa, especially Tanzania, they came to the realization that whether it's true or not, this kind of, they had a fear that they were linking them up with the West, especially when this was the Cold Era, and Ghana in particular, the Pan-Africanists, let me be specific, were having allies with the Eastern Bloc. Now, why has the debates been kept so long? In other words, what are the obstacles of repatriation, the obstacles towards repatriation? Repatriation is only a part of a much larger whole, the transatlantic slave trade in its entirety. It has ended, but with dire consequences and questions mankind might have to live with forever. Most issues associated with it come with dissension and divergent views. We can realize that even the numbers transported out of Africa, a matter as simple as this, has remained a matter of debate because we have, various authorities on the matter quoting different figures. That alone is a debate. Also, though indigenous Africans are eager to welcome their brethren home, there seems to be some preference for who qualifies to return. This reflects in the invitation by late President Rawlings to diaspora Africans to settle in Ghana. Though it is backed by an act, it covers only diasporans with clean records, those without criminal background. They are also expected to provide evidence that they are capable of contributing to the socio-economic development of Ghana. Indeed, it is a case of repatriation with strings attached. Once it is guided by selectivity and preference, it cannot be a wholehearted venture. Among diasporans, they are not also agreed on some of the issues associated with the aftermath of abolition. A typical case has to do with the restoration of the Cape Coast and Elmina castles in Ghana. Apart from complaints of not being involved by the Ghanaian side, they are divided over the essence of the exercise. While some opine that refurbishing the castles for tourism and monetary gain amounted to desecration, others saw it as a good venture. Even the use of the term castle comes with dissension. Some see it as connoting royalty and nobility in the European sense, while in reality, they ought to be seen as symbols of suffering and even death of their ancestors. For others, both castles and dungeons could be simultaneously used to describe them. So heated was this debate over this that a meeting had to be held in May 1994 at the Cape Coast Castle to resolve the issue to appease the diasporans. Tied to all these are also the issues of reparation and outmigration from Africa to America, Europe, and currently to some parts of Asia, especially the Gulf region. There is dissension over reparation, of what form it should take and whether it is necessary at all. For example, in 2015, former British Prime Minister David Cameron rejected reparations for British involvement in the Caribbean slave trade. This was in response to a 10-point plan designed by some Caribbean states in 2014 to seek reparations from the former slave-owning states of Europe. He reiterated that his aim was to focus on the future and not historical wrong, and that Britain's concern has always been that we do not believe reparations is the right approach. He maintained that reparations should take the form of aid. The chair of the National Commission on Reparations in Jamaica, Brent Shepherd, also noted with grave concern in 2007 with great concern that in 2007, the then Prime Minister of Britain, Tony Blair, spoke with deep sorrow and regret concerning the slave trade, but refused to apologize. Indeed, there is no sign that none of the former slave-owning states of Europe is committed to the task of making reparations. William Hague, a former UK Foreign Secretary, did not also see reparations as the way forward. Others believe that as the former slaves are long gone, who stands in for the benefit of reparation? Should it be their descendants, their communities, or countries from which they came? Africans were forced out of the continent during the period of the transatlantic slave trade, but they are now willingly moving on their own, dying in the desert and on the high seas. Surely, these are signs that all is not well at home, so why should others come? The current state of outmigration in Africa gives no justification for repatriation. Perhaps a major obstacle to repatriation can be seen in the way in which Okoye describes African and African-American relations. He came across the evidence that most Blacks of Columbia, USA, have always had a decided aversion for Africa, have always opposed all African colonization schemes, have been ashamed of their ancestral background. Similarly, relations between Africans and African Americans as studied by Philip Wamba in the 1990s confirms Okoye's observation. According to him, many African Americans do not look on their African heritage with pride or even a sense of identification. And many African Americans not only fail to identify with each other, but look on one another with scorn, resentment, or even with hostility. Of their relationships, he considers them to be multi-layered, often stormily complicated by misperceptions and misunderstandings that have sometimes caused a chilly distance to grow between the two sides. Consequently, he sees African and African-American relations to be mythical rather than being real. Conclusion. Indeed, the legacy of the slave trade is not only complex, but it can best be described as a kind of rebirth of its old self. Rhetoric, projects and festivals associated with it, such as the Slave Trade Route projects in Ghana and Nigeria, PanAfricanism and Festa in Ghana and Nigeria respectively, Black History Month, among others in the diaspora, USA and UK in particular, all work together to sustain the legacy. And what more, there are calls to popularize the history of the slave trade by Ibrahima Babakeke and supported by W. Bediaku Lamus Smith. Therefore, the debate on repatriation is not only too long, it will continue to be so long as the transatlantic slave trade and all that emanates from it continue to be. And this is the reality. Thank you. Yeah, I can hear you.
Vincent, we can't hear you.
Okay.
I can't hear, please.
Vincent, we
Please,
can't hear.
Vincent. Or maybe it's from there.
Can you hear me now?
Please, I can't hear.
Yes, yes, I think it's better.
I just wanted to thank you for this amazing paper, and thank you for reminding us of the place of Ghana in this whole debate and the importance of basically talking about the political choices made by different Ghanaian presidents here throughout the years. So thank you for your paper. I'd like to open the floor now for questions, and I think that I'm sure we're going to have quite a few. So if you want to raise your hand, those who want to ask a question, please do so. Any hands? No one? Femi, you had your hand up? Temi Tope, sorry, Temi Tope. You here? Yes, Temi Tope, please.
Yeah, greetings. Can I be heard?
Yes, I can hear.
Oh, great. I want to thank the presenter, the professor presenter for the presentation. I find the presentation quite interesting, and also to thank the organizers for this, initiative. I would just quickly like to point out that, at this time that we're talking about, decolonization, the need for, an African knowledge decolonization project. I want to suggest, or I just want to raise that the usage of the word, slave trade, some scholars have attempted a critique of it to say that the transatlantic slave trade in itself, the slave trade in the transatlantic slave trade might not be historically correct. And also what we call the Arab slave trade may not be historically correct also. To them, they are suggesting that instead of that, there's a necessity for us to begin to call it what it is, slavery, because when you add to trade, you create, a historical notion that it was mutual, because trade has got to be mutual, whereas in actual case, for a very long time in the history of this slaveries, nothing was mutual. The relationship was not in any way mutual. Therefore, we think that there's a need for us to begin to call it, what it is: the Atlantic slavery, the Arab slavery. Anything less beyond that might not really, speak to what happened during that era. And I also want to point out, or in a somewhat question, which will end up like a question also, that I think that the question of repatriation, as the presenter, pointed out, is indeed related to the concept of Pan-Africanism, as we saw in the works and practices of Kwame Nkrumah. And I want to say that specifically about West Africa, specifically about West Africa, that the returnees, for instance, the African Brazilian returnees that the presenter made mention of, during the 19th centuries, that the different returnees had different experiences. And I know the presenter pointed this out. She pointed it out that the Saro returnees, for instance, the Sierra Leone, returnees in Nigeria specifically, were not entertained by the indigenous people, when in actual fact, the African Brazilians were entertained, by the indigenous people. This is also as a result of, a materialistic factor. It is not so, I think it is partly true also that the British colonial state was responsible for the settlement of the African Brazilians in Lagos. They gave them land during the mid-19th century. This is to say, because the presenter suggested that what led to, the indifference that the indigenous people had towards the Saro could be that, the Saro were in alliance with the British colonial state. It is also true for the African Brazilian returnees, during the mid-19th century. They had, a cordial relationship with the British colonial states, the British colonial state, the agencies, the officials saw the returnees, the African Brazilian returnees, as an ample ingredient, towards the legitimate, so-called, legitimate trade that they initiated during the, mid-19th century. But it is also true, that the indigenous Lagosians, thought highly of the African Brazilian returnees. And it is because the African Brazilian returnees, as the presenter pointed out, came into Lagos with, several, petty proletariat activities or occupations, which endeared, the Lagos community to them, just like she pointed out, they were majorly, artisans. And because of this, the indigenous people were able to galvanize towards them and relate with them, because these were individuals, these were returnees, they were not really ready, to be subservient to the British colonial state. Well, in actual fact, the Saro, returnees were ready too, they were, and that is why you would notice that starting from the earliest 20th century, the Saro returnees were majorly the ones involved in the civil service, because they saw that as an accumulative factor, as an object of accumulation. So I think that that there's a necessity for us to begin to interpret some of these experiences within the context of, materialism, because when we attempt this, this part, we'll be able to have a clearer understanding as to what happened with the question of repatriation, during the mid-19th century, and in fact, to this moment. And I know that the presenter, related it to the post-colonial period, which I find very, very interesting. But it is also true, or it is right to suggest that perhaps the negative impact of repatriation, as the presenter pointed out, is also a product of the failure of leadership in understanding the relationship between Pan-Africanism and repatriation. You would see when Nkrumah was insisting that African Americans, radical African Americans must repatriate to Ghana during the 50s and the 60s. He was saying that clearly because there's a necessity for a unifying force across the African continent and beyond the African continent. He wasn't saying that all sorts of persons could come down to Africa. He wasn't saying that because you're Black. No. He was categorically interested in those that understood the concept of Pan-Africanism, that have a huge understanding of Pan-Africanism. But what do we have today? We have leaders on the continent that are preaching repatriation, or just because they needed, funds out of it, and which is what I think happened in Ghana with the year of return. How the American bourgeois elites were invited to Ghana just for the fun of it. Nothing fundamental whatsoever, came out from that year of no return, project that massive resources that ought to have been, spent into some other thing, was diverted into. So I'm saying that at this time we cannot hide under, the beautiful necessity for repatriation in order to foster, agendas that are not necessarily, agendas that are not necessarily, ready to project, the African continent beyond what it is at this time. And I think lastly, on the question of reparation is a must. It is a must. And according to what, like the professor pointed out, what the British Prime Minister said, it's not but an expression of how ignorant, the white bourgeois elite are to the necessity of reparation. If the Jews had gotten reparation, if the Germans had gotten reparations at different points in time, why is it possible for the African descendants of slavery, to get their dues, and I think that these dues might not necessarily be, might not necessarily be monetized, but there is a necessity for that. As Malcolm pointed out, you have a knife right stock, behind me. You haven't even removed that knife, and here you are insulting me or blaming me or telling me that I have no right to demand for my dues. So I think that the question of reparation cannot be negotiated. And as African scholars, as world scholars, those that are interested in African studies, there is a necessity to put this agenda on the front banner. Thank you very much again for the presentation.
Thank you very much for your useful contribution. I'm concerned about the first part of your contribution, which has to do with the use of the correct term or the right term or the most appropriate term, that's slavery instead of slave trade. But there's evidence of African participation, and especially at the time of abolition, when the European participants were ready to do it and legislated against it, you realize that on the side of the Africans, it wasn't that easy. We had interlopers who were secretly, carrying on the trade with their European counterparts. And we have examples of chiefs who even participated. They didn't want it to go because they were gaining from it, gaining a lot of income and using it for wars and other things that they wanted to do. So in this case, there was an exchange. They got something for the people that left the continent. And so can we say that trade shouldn't come in here? Of course, from the beginning, there was resistance, and throughout there has been, forms of resistance. But there's also evidence of Africans receiving something from those who came to take the Africans away. So can we say that trade was not involved here? That's my concern.
But Prof, I think that, it has been, I think Rodney partly, jump into this discussion that firstly, what we had, when these slaveries, began was actually, the colonizers, the enslavers going in depth, into the hinterlands to kidnap Africans, really. And of course, with the corruption of indigenous people, indigenous persons in these kingdoms, in these empires, and all of that. But then the exchange, which is an economic, term. The question of exchange comes on board. This form of exchange, how was it carried out? Upon what basis was the value system built? The economic value system of this exchange, this mode of exchange that we are talking about, upon what value system was it built on? Because it is not just correct to say that, because we are exchanging commodities, that means that we, partly involve ourselves, or we exclusively involve ourselves in, a trade or a form of trade. No, and then that's the point that I think Rodin tried to, deal with in one of his essays. That, you cannot just singularly call it because there's a form of exchange, or we exchange human beings for this and that and all of that. And I think it's also appropriate to say that for those Africans, that had qualms, that had problems, in withdrawing from the processes of slavery, during the 19th century, consequent to the abolition, period. It is relevant for us to understand that one could never have expected that the withdrawal of the, African dealers in slavery would have occurred overnight, almost immediately. It could never have been possible. We're talking about an economic system, an economic relationship that had been in existence for over 300 years. You cannot suddenly expect that, the African middlemen and women in some instances would immediately withdraw back, and go back to their daily activities, when in actual fact, that's what they've known, that's what their ancestors have known for, over 300 years. So when we speak about abolition and when we speak about the resistance to that abolition itself, it's most common from that understanding that, it has been a form of, economic system that had been in existence for, years, hundreds of years, and therefore, for those middlemen, they simply had, qualms, which is a legitimate qualms, because it has benefited Europe, it has benefited the Americas, and yet they are coming on that, they must abolish the system of the system of, the economic system, because they've done, come up with industrial revolution and all of that, and now it is no longer ripe for Africa to engage in slavery. So I'm saying that we must come up from that materialistic understanding that it was materially impossible for the African middlemen and women to simply back down from, slavery during the 19th century.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions? Thank you for your contribution, Mr. Temitope. Do you have any other questions? Try to maybe ask shorter questions if you want, easier maybe. Tayo, Mr. Tayo, please.
Thank you, Dr. Marciana.
Sorry.
It's Miss Tayo, actually.
Sorry.
No problem.
Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Dr. Mariama, for your presentation. It's a great journey in history. I would like to know that under this period of discussion, were there any women standing out, doing anything wonderful, amongst the returnees from the different societies that you mentioned to us? And I say this because I know that from the research that I have done as an independent scholar, we tend to find that in the writing of history, women are invisible. So I'd just like to know if you have anything to share with us about the role of women, any woman that stood out in the period that you have shared with us. Thank you.
All right. I think in my presentation, I did mention, just recently, the year of return, I've given one example of Los Angeles-born Kalia, who is currently in Ghana and has established here and is doing well and getting other people engaged too. And we didn't have so many women coming, especially in the post-independent era. But the few that came, at least they also rekindled the spirit of Pan-Africanism. And I've said of the Afro-Brazilians that they came with their trade and then they were artisans and they engaged in agriculture. So the women that came along with them participated in these activities. But you've drawn my attention to a very important aspect of my work. I'm also interested in women involvement in issues when they come up. So I'll do a more detailed research and see if I can find specific cases. But at least we should be able to find some. There are some only that have not laid hands on them. So I'll take note of that and include it in the work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who is someone next want to ask a question?
Thank you, Doctor, for your presentation. Actually, I have a question. Why do you think Ghana is still important today? Is it because of the legal framework put into place by your president? Or what's the place of Ghana, basically? I like to understand the place of Ghana in this debate today, in 2021.
Pardon me?
What's the place of Ghana today in this debate?
The place of Ghana. You are meaning this year?
Yes, now. How important is this debate today in Ghana? Is it part of it?
Well, in Ghana, generally, you find that people are interested in these returnees, but you realize that, like I've mentioned in my presentation, many people think that when the issue of returnee return comes up, they are thinking of the benefit to be derived from these people. They think that, yeah, there are people coming from a developed world, and so if they come in, the focus is on what are they bringing to us. And I think that's another worrying aspect of it, because you realize that even with the promise made by former President Rawlings, late President Rawlings, a condition was attached that those who are clean records and those who do not have any criminal background. So in that case, and people have raised concern about this, that these are people who are segregated against, who are somehow suffering from an unfair justice system in the Americas. And so if they are coming home and you are also giving them this condition, then what's the difference here? Is it not better to stay back there where they have grown up and, have been able to adapt to the situation? If you say that you want people with skills, people who are talented, clean people, then it means that there's some preference here. And I don't think that is fair on our part. But currently, when the issue of returnees come up, people are thinking of the benefits. People are thinking of the investments they can come and make. People are thinking of the benefits they can derive from them. And I think that is unfortunate, because if we think that we are concerned about what we have done to our people in the past and want them home, it should be a kind of wholesale thing. Come if you are ready to come, but not because you have something good to offer. We should also think of what we can also give them. Welcome them and help them to settle in, and whatever that we can offer them to make them comfortable. I think that is important. But this is the way many people look at it, the benefit from these returnees and not what we can do for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Who would like, do you have any other questions, people? I'm looking at the hands. It's fine, man. Don't you have any questions? May I ask you a question, Doctor? Can I ask you a question, please, about the sources you may want to use to study the returnees in Ghana? What would a researcher need to use today to undertake research on such a subject today in Ghana?
What methods to adopt in this study?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
what kind of documents can you use? Yeah.
Yes, you can see that this topic that goes far back in time. Getting the primary sources are really difficult. It needs funding for you to extend your tentacles far and wide to get the primary documents. So you realize that I've relied more on primary documents. So it would be good if we lay hands on some of the primary documents, but it's really difficult. It needs funding. Right. So there's another aspect of it that I think that we should look at. When we are dealing with subjects of this kind, that is far back in time, then we need to consider the kind of approach that we have to use, the kind of data that we have to use. Sometimes if you rely solely on secondary data, then people think that it's not a good work, you know. They think that you should try and balance it with the primary sources, but here's the problem associated with it. It is difficult, but we can, if we are determined and we are ready to do the work well, we can put our hands together, get funding, and get people to move to the faraway places that they can get these primary documents to balance with the primary ones. So that's what I can say with regard to that.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Any more questions that people might have, you know? Feel free to ask. No? Everyone's a bit shy or tired. End of the day, Doctor. Should we call it a day then? Yes. So we'd like to thank you, Doctor, for taking the time for speaking to us tonight. I know it's it's a lot of time and work on behalf, so thank you on my behalf of IFRA-Nigeria. So thank you. Please, oh, Mrs. Martha. Before just saying goodbye, Mrs. Martha, please. Mrs. Martha.
All right. Yeah, just wanted to add my voice to the congratulatory messages to Dr. Kuusana. And so just to thank her for a great presentation and then for taking the pains to go through this journey again. It's an interesting topic and I encourage her to do more research into it and come up with a greater paper. And along the line, I had issues with my internet, so I don't know if she mentioned it, but I think during President Kufuor's time too, there were some interventions, there were some initiatives, and this has greatly been chronicled in Techua Menu's work on the homecoming of Africans in the diaspora. So probably we can also take a look at that and incorporate that. If you did mention it, that's okay, but if you didn't, then we can add that one.
No, I didn't mention it, so I'll take note of that. Thank you very much for drawing my attention.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all. So thank you, Doctor, again for your time, for your work, and Juliette and I hope we send you an email to say thank you. But we hope you can be with us next week. We're gonna have a next presentation next week. It's in French next week for those who can speak a bit of French. It's on food crisis in Burkina Faso. So if you've got time, please join us next week. So thank you all for being with us today, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Ma.
Thank you,
That's a
Idas,
great one.
Akbe, and I'm sure I'm leaving one out.